Now, as the war in Iran descends into total catastrophe, there's no better person to speak to than Trita Parsi. A brilliant guest. I'm not going to bother continually introducing your various different hats. Brilliant analyst. We've had you on many times. Everyone knows who you are now. I just want to start with Pete Hegseth, Secretary of State for War. His extraordinary press conference today. I just want to start by just asking you your response to him saying that they will achieve total superiority in the sky, death and destruction from the sky all day long. That's what he said. How do you respond to that?
A couple of things. First of all, what you see here is that the administration is desperately trying to signal that they are in control. And the more desperately they try to signal that, the more they come across as not being in control. I mean, saying that we're controlling the skies, etc. I mean, that may actually be very true. The Iranians do not have a strong airspace. They already suffered tremendously in the June war. When it comes to that, they are suffering right now. What the Israelis are doing in Tehran right now is increasingly looking like what they did in Gaza. So that's all true, probably. But that is not what's going to decide this war. At the end of the day, what you're seeing here is that the Trump administration had a plan A. That plan A came crashing down within 48 to 72 hours of that war. And now they are scrambling to come up with a plan B. And because they don't have one, they're constantly shifting their justification for the war, the goals for the war, the time length of the war. Reality is at this point, the Iranians are increasingly controlling the geography of the war, the length of the war, and the intensity of the war. That does not mean that Iran is winning the war. I want to be very clear. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that Trump has already lost control of the war. And if you compare that to what happened in Iraq, Iraq actually went into plans at least until August 2003 for 5 months. In August, you had the bombardment of the UN building in the middle of a press conference, killing the top UN diplomat there from Brazil. And that was the beginning of the descent into the insurrection and the civil war. But for the first 5 months, it was actually going quite according to plan. They had some problems, of course. Here we have very clear evidence that the plan has already crashed, and they did not have a plan B, because at the end of the day, the whole premise of all of this was that Trump had been lulled into believing that the Iranians are much, much weaker than they actually were. That's the only reason why this war really started in the first place. The Israelis succeeded in convincing him of their weakness.
As you say, they betted on the whole system crashing down like a pack of cards, and that hasn't happened. They're floating around. I mean, just in terms of Iran, because as you know, it's missiles. That's what he's boasting about. In a few days, they'll be gone. But is it the drones? I mean, these drones are very cheap to make. And the air defenses of the Gulf states, the Telegraph has said, will last basically a week. So does that mean that after that, these very inexpensive drones, Iran still has the ability to cause chaos, basically amongst the Western allies in the Gulf?
Yes, particularly mindful of the fact that it appears that the United States has put most of the air defense systems to protect Israel and not protect the GCC states, which has really angered them. And that's all, of course, they're extremely angry with Iran for having attacked them, particularly those countries that actually worked very hard to prevent this war. We've seen a lower number of Iranian missile strikes as well as drone attacks. It is unclear to me exactly what that reason for that is. Is it because the US has been very successful, and Israel as well, in taking out the launchers? Is it because they're running out? Is it because of other reasons? I remember that we saw a similar pattern in the 12-day war. After 3 or 4 days, you saw a significant reduction of the number of missiles that the Iranians were shooting. And immediately the speculation was that Israel has managed to take out the launchers, they're losing the war. Instead, we saw that there was an uneven pattern in the launching intensity. But what was happening is that they were testing new missiles, and increasingly they were getting more missiles through, even though they were shooting less of them. I don't know if that is what is happening here. I don't know if the Iranians are now suddenly shifting their strategy to something else. But I would be very careful from either side making any of these declarations that they're really winning the war. That is part of the conduct of war, to spread that type of propaganda. A key political figure in Iran, Ali Larijani, just tweeted earlier this morning that the Iranians have killed more than 500 American soldiers. I don't find that credible. I think there's a likelihood that they've killed quite a bit more than the 6 that the administration has admitted. And I think that the Trump administration will try to pace the announcement of any of these deaths in order not to shock the country, a country that already is overwhelmingly opposed to this war. But I find it extremely unlikely that the Iranians have managed to kill that many American soldiers and that the Pentagon has managed to keep that more or less a secret. I find that very unlikely. And I also find some of the speculation of how the US has already managed to take out X amount of what the Iranians are doing unlikely, or at least not credible until they have been verified by other sources, because warring parties, they lie as part of the war.
I mean, in terms of the regime, I mean, do you see any signs of cracks, or do you think it's actually rallied? And in terms of the support base, people often estimate 20 to 30% of the country still supports the regime in some form or other. They have managed to mobilize big crowds, which they weren't doing before the war began. Do you think there is a kind of rallying of their base, and that strengthened the regime from where it was?
I've spoken to people in Iran, including this morning, who said that a lot of people have now left Tehran because of the indiscriminate bombing by the Israelis. They're out in other cities. Those cities tend to be calm. And every night there's like parades or some sort of demonstrations in favor of the country, as well as the regime, at least in some of those instances. And he said that he's not seeing any signs of counter-protest or anything like that. I don't think we've seen a clear rallying around the flag sentiment. In fact, we saw it much more clearly in June than what we see today. But I think more importantly, perhaps from the standpoint of the US, we're not seeing the cracks. We're not seeing people pouring out in the streets thinking that this is the moment to do a revolution. I think the calculation or the plan was that after a week or two of taking, and I'm talking about the plan of some of the folks on the opposition side, exiled, the monarchists, for instance, they believe that a couple of weeks of war would have led to enough of the IRGC and the Basij and the police being weakened so that people could take to the streets and overthrow the government. That may have been their calculation, but that's a calculation that also means that in the meantime, the country is more or less blown up into pieces. It also means that this war will go on much longer than the Trump administration wanted and perhaps can afford. So there seems to be a lot of conflicting calculations when it comes to this, but so far, we're not seeing the uprising in the manner that I think the opposition or the administration wanted, nor are we seeing dramatic signs of nationalism at the level, at least, that we saw when the Israelis surprised Iran with an attack in June. One factor that may change all of this to the detriment of the Trump administration is the announcement that they are now going to go in, or they're going to be supporting Kurdish separatist groups in the western part of the country. And I think, frankly, based on the comments that came out of many members of Congress yesterday after they were briefed by the administration, to me, it sounded very clearly that the classified briefing said that the US is going to go in with ground troops as well. And if you now have ground troops from the United States in support of separatists, that is a factor that I think will definitely play much more into the line of rallying around the flag, fueling nationalism, because this really justifies, validates a narrative that is very strong in Iran, that ultimately the objective of the United States and Western powers is not democracy. I mean, very few people in Iran would believe it is, but that it actually is the separation of Iran, the disintegration of Iran, turning Iran into 6 smaller countries. This is a very strong narrative in the Iranian mind because there's plenty of evidence of this. In fact, this is one of the things that Tariq Ali Aziz, the foreign minister of Saddam Hussein, said a couple of months into the war, that it would be preferable for Iraq at the time to have 6 small Irans as a neighbor rather than one big Iran. This is something that Bernard Lewis had been writing about and talking about ever since the 1970s. So this is not taken out of thin air. And when the US is now suddenly, because of, frankly, in my view, scrambling for a plan B, talks about supporting Kurdish separatist groups and revealing that the CIA has already been arming and training them for some time, that is definitely going to go more in the direction of fueling nationalism and rallying around the flag.
Because it's striking, I mean, the exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who's been abandoned by Donald Trump, I mean, he denounces those separatists, doesn't he? So it's kind of amongst, the kind of pro-US opposition, they oppose that because they understand that that's anathema to the population of Iran. It sees balkanization.
Well, yes, but at the same time, I have to say it's such an amateurish and idiotic calculation on their end to think that it wouldn't lead to this scenario. I mean, what does Reza Pahlavi have to offer Trump? Trump still refuses to talk to him, dismissed him again yesterday, and said that, he seems to be like a nice guy. Let's be clear, when Trump calls someone a nice guy, that's probably not a compliment. And he has now started talking directly to separatist Kurdish militias because they have something to offer him. They are on the ground, they are armed, and they can play a role in the war. They can also play a role in what comes afterwards. Pahlavi brings none of that to the table. So why they thought that Trump would select him to govern the country, particularly after Trump made clear that he chose not to put Machado in power in Venezuela because she wasn't there, because she didn't have enough support in the security apparatus, should have been an obvious flag that that's not the direction Trump would go if the war went the wrong way, and that he would go towards the direction of a ground invasion or at a minimum support for separatist organizations.
How do you see this playing out in the coming weeks? And that's very striking because the Secretary of War, as we're supposed to call them now, has said this could go on for many weeks. The time scale keeps growing in potential. What does this? I mean, because there's no off ramp. What is the off ramp? How does this? What's the declare victory and go home? What do you think? Based on what we're seeing, is likely to happen?
There are off ramps if Trump wants them. He could today even declare victory. He could say that I killed the supreme leader. He tried to kill me. I killed him before he managed to kill me. I've shown that I'm willing to use my military. I've already degraded their missiles, their launchers, etc. He could declare victory and walk back and essentially say that everything else he said was a deception against the Iranians. He still has the capability. No other president would probably have that capability. He can do this. I don't suspect that he will. I suspect that he is now going to continue to throw good money after bad. And he's going to try to see if he can turn the tables on the Iranians by having this land invasion before he is even willing to consider any off-ramp, which means, and I don't think the Iranians are going to back out either. Both of them believe that they can survive this, which means that we're going to have a couple of days at a minimum that are going to be extremely bloody and destabilizing. And only after that do I think we might, if we're lucky, see any willingness on either side to look for an off-ramp. But in the best case, that is a couple of days. In the worst case, that in and of itself, that period in and of itself could be a couple of weeks. But I think we should get ready, particularly with Hegseth, who has made a name for himself as someone who wanted to undo a lot of the restrictions that the Pentagon has had on how it conducts war, on how many collateral damage they can accept for a strike, etc. This is what Hegseth has been calling woke warfare. He's against it, and he wants to go and adopt more rules along the lines of what the Israelis have, which essentially are no rules.
Just a couple of final things. I mean, Professor Robert Pape, who's a specialist on aerial bombardment in particular, but he talks about the escalation trap, and that's what the US is now trapped in. But I mean, if you're talking about ground troops being involved, it's saying quagmire. That is very hard to extract.
Absolutely. I think this is the pattern that I think a lot of people are fearing, which is that Trump may think like, I'm going to do this one thing, I'm going to turn this around. But once you've done that, you're already even more committed to this. You feel like the sunk cost is even greater. And then you're like, well, okay, I'm going to do one more thing. And before you know it, it's been freaking 20 years. That's the history of US warfare in a lot of these different countries. And the fact that because of the invest is so great, it's too costly to pull out. So you rather just hand it over to the next president and see if that president is willing to withdraw and to pay the cost of a withdrawal. And that president will be like, no, I'd rather have the next president do it. And they just keep on kicking the can down the road. And that is how the United States destroys countries in the Middle East over the course of decades.
And just very finally, I mean, we've seen Tehran being carpet bombed, hideous footage, I have to say. What do you think the impact is going to be on the Iranian population of that?
I am extremely worried that, it's just going to be an absolute terrible situation. I think you're going to see a completely different level of anti-Americanism after this. I think there's going to be a huge rift between Iranians and Iran. Iranian society and much of the diaspora, who have been singing and dancing to these bombs. In the past, the division was between the diaspora and the theocracy, the government, the system. Now I think we're going to see a very, very unhealthy and dangerous and unfortunate rift between the people inside the country who are dying under these bombs and those who are sitting with pictures of Reza Pahlavi above their head, dancing to the sound of their compatriots in Iran being killed.
Sobering stuff. Trita, as ever, thank you so much. Always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Please like, subscribe, leave your comments, thoughts. But Trita, thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.